Welcome to another episode of Fractional with Chris Capone, where we showcase local leaders, entrepreneurs, and people making positive impacts in our community. Today I'm joined by Ben David, who served as the elected district attorney for New Hanover and Pender Counties for 2 decades before launching the Community Justice Center of New Hanover County. The CJC offers a comprehensive coordinated network of law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, and social service providers under one roof, serving victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, elder abuse, child abuse, and at-risk youth. The goal is to minimize the burden on victims by reducing the number of times they must retell their story and travel for services. So we've got a special guest here today with Ben David, but we've got Potter here.
Yeah, this is the star of the show right here. This is Potter, the courthouse dog, the first ever facility dog in the courts in North Carolina.
Yep.
He joined the DA's office, about 9 years ago, and took care not only of the survivors of violence, but the 50 plus employees in the DA's office. And so he's actually with me today because I work across the street from the courthouse now, and I still have my former employees. They don't miss me, but they asked to see Potter, so he's been at court all day.
Oh my gosh, that's a nice surprise.
And you've got one too, by the way. Moose is, I'm already a fan.
Yeah, I got Moose back here. This is his first podcast appearance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You've had 68 episodes and Moose is finally loose.
Yeah, Moose is finally loose.
Okay. What's up, Moose?
This is so cool. So I'd like to start with, what was the spark or the idea for you to create the Community Justice Center?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I was very privileged for many years to be the district attorney here. And I used to say, and this is what I ran on for office back in 2004, giving victims a voice at the courthouse. That was my motto. And prosecutors speak for the dead in murder trials, and we of course give victims a voice, and we're the conscience for our community anytime a crime occurs. What I wanted to do with the next part of my life is help victims find their own voices, and to say, listen, you survived, we might need to testify, but beyond just getting justice, which obviously is still the key component of what we're doing at the CJC, the Community Justice Center, let's also focus on healing from the trauma you've experienced and get you on a pathway towards really being resilient and finding hope in your life again. And so whether it's gang violence or domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assaults, there's a whole category of folks who need something beyond just their day in court, but to really have a longer range plan. And so that is the spark behind the CJC.
And so the CJC is, how about you explain?
Sure.
Tell us what the CJC is.
Well, it's a one-stop shop for hope, healing, and justice. It's 15,000 square feet immediately across the street from the courthouse in our old county jail. That building closed back in 2004, the same year I won office. And you might know that First Baptist, who had a jail ministry, bought the entire building, which was the detectives division for the sheriff's office at the front and the visitor center for the jail. But then there was a back tower for incarcerated individuals. The front part, Harrelson Center, was born, and they immediately started ministering to the poor. And it was things like our drug treatment court was headquartered there. When we would have big ideas on how we could help justice-involved individuals, and there were many, back-to-work programs for people who need a second chance, after-school programs for kids, veteran treatment services, counseling, whatever it might be. When we were incubating big ideas at the courthouse, we would frequently put those services across the street.
Right.
Kind of doing justice and loving mercy, right?
Yep.
And one thing that we could never really tackle because it was too big of a job was the old jail, because there were feet of concrete in every direction and bars. And so it sat vacant, that jail tower, for 2 decades. And towards the end of the time in office, I reached out to the community endowment. The sale of the hospital provided us, as you probably are aware, a huge amount of money.
Yes.
And I said, what if we finally take over that old jail tower and have a place for victims, survivors of violence? Because we already have one for defendants, and they need resources too. You voted for it in Marcy's law. 2-1. You have seen our state constitution that turns, by the way, 250 years old this year, just like our Declaration of Independence later this week.
Mm-hmm.
And it has an embedded Bill of Rights in our Constitution that came about the time I was in law school at Wake Forest.
Okay.
It gives people the right to meet with the prosecutor at an early stage.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them the right to allocute, that is, speak at the time of sentencing, and to be present in all critical proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
The right to criminal restitution in cases where that's appropriate. And on these rights go. Well, rights without resources are empty promises. So I said to the endowment, listen, we need more resources for the survivors of violence. We need to put it all in one place where we can break down the walls between civil, family, and criminal courts, where someone might need a protective order, for instance, which is a civil piece of paper.
Yep.
My prosecutors are not allowed to privately practice law. I can now, and I actually represent people on Fridays in that courtroom. They might have a custody issue coming out of that, and there might also be an assault on a female case, which is obviously criminal. Right. All of those things need a one-stop shop mentality. Yeah. And so that's how the CJC was born.
That's amazing. And so paint the picture of what it looked like before this. You had a victim has something, they
Right.
go to court, and then they have to go to this place, and then they have to drive across town to this place. And
yes. Well, I'm not here to have a theoretical conversation. Unfortunately, I dealt with life and death issues for 25 years that I was a prosecutor. And just again, to take you back to the first year I was the district attorney, we had 8 first-degree murders related to domestic violence that year in this district, New Hanover and Pender County. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about seriously safe places like Landfall. Mm-hmm. That was the Gail Tice case. UNCW, not one but 2 different students were murdered, one on campus, one off campus, both by students at UNCW. We had a young woman right next door at New Hanover High School killed by her boyfriend. Mm-hmm. In 5 of those 8 cases, the women had protective orders, and in none of those cases had it been reported to law enforcement. And so what I tried to do most immediately back then was to say, we need to change that. Mm-hmm. And so we said to the clerk's office, because a lot of people were going in to get that civil protection where they say, I need to talk to a judge, I need the person to stay away from me. Can you send them upstairs to us? And we will co-locate some detectives, one from WPD and one from the sheriff's office. Mm-hmm. And we will have a dedicated prosecutor and a dedicated victim witness assistant from my office that can handle that and be this one-stop shop for the police prosecutor approach.
Right.
So we set aside roughly 600 square feet and had that 4-person team. Mm-hmm. And that worked very well. No question. I called it the homicide prevention team. It was saving lives. Mm-hmm. So when people would come in to get that civil protection, we'd say, hey, do you also want to file this report, and can we see this thing through? And in many cases, they said yes. Again, we empower victims to choose whether they're going forward, to be very clear on that.
Right.
The only time that it's a mandatory report and you have to go forward is child abuse. Anybody who witnesses that, anybody with knowledge of it, that's a required report. There's a lot of times when people experience sexual violence or physical violence as adults and say, I don't want to involve the authorities, but I still need help with Rape Crisis Center, and there's a 24/7 call center now.
Right.
Or I still want to get out of this situation. Can I get into a shelter? Or can I have a security plan? And so there's still a great need for resources outside of the system, quote unquote. And so we've had abiding and very strong relationships with many of those nonprofits, and you know them by name. Carousel Center for our kids, Coastal Horizons Rape Crisis for the adults, Domestic Violence Shelter and Services. DSS obviously does both adult protective services, think elder abuse cases, and also Child Protective Services, CPS, for our little ones. And so I said, it's not enough just to have this family violence unit. What if we could co-locate all the groups I just mentioned with those police prosecutors, and instead of having just one prosecutor and one VWA, let's take on things like human trafficking. Let's take on gang violence. Let's take on those cases that are hard to prove, where you need physical evidence, and have a clinic that can maybe help us do that. The average survivor of violence, Chris, in a domestic violence case will tell their story 9 times.
Yeah.
And I want you to consider what that means. It means that someone gets frustrated when they think no one's listening, and they might say, I'm giving up. Or they might not have a car, and you just mentioned they've got to go to 9 different places. Or they start to unpack this trauma and remember details along the way. And now that we have 6 or 7 statements floating around out there, they're going to get cross-examined with all the variations in it, and people think they're lying, and they're not. They're just picking up the puzzle pieces. It's
they
actually
just went through a traumatic event.
Exactly. So what we do now, when that person experiences trauma and maybe runs down to the courthouse like they have historically done, and we'll have 40 to 50 each week, Chris, they'll come in and say, I need a protective order. And the same great clerk's office says, instead of going 3 floors above you, literally right across the street, in fact, we can get an escort to walk you over. There's this wonderful place with childcare, with, a coffee machine. You can file all of this virtually, so you don't even have to be in here. Your kid doesn't need to eat goldfish crackers in the corner and wonder if your husband's about to walk in. Why don't you walk with the bailiffs over there, and there's a great team of professionals waiting for you. So they walk into the CJC. We get them to fill out what we call the half sheet, which is just some little demographic information so that we can look to see who their unsafe person is and what they might be justice involved in, whether it's reported or not. We then get them into a room with a navigator, someone who has a confidential relationship with them and says, listen, you're in charge. We have wonderful resources here. What brings you to the center? I need a protective order. Let's just use that as an example. Okay. Do you feel comfortable having a court advocate from the shelter help you fill out that paperwork? Because we can get that all filed and get you before a judge this afternoon. Yes. Listen, we also have the very detectives from either the county or the city, depending on where you live, that would be going to take that report at your house. They're here around the corner. Do you want us to bring them in? Yes or no? The prosecutor who would handle that case, by the way, it used to live in about 3 different rooms at the courthouse. We have, are you ready for this? 5,000 felonies, 20,000 misdemeanors, and 50,000 traffic tickets every year. And so it's pretty easy for things to feel like they're getting lost in the shuffle, even though there's a method to the madness. Well, if you come to court on any given day, historically, you would see 2 different courtrooms going at any day. One, the WPD, the other, all the other agencies, the sheriff, the highway patrol, the beach police would be in the other courtroom. That would be the only thing that separates out where you might be. But it didn't matter if it was a bar fight or, shoplifting, prostitution, DWIs. All that was sitting in that same courtroom with these child abuse cases and domestic violence. And for years I've said, we can do better than that. These are special victims unit cases, and they require some care and feeding that's different. Too frequently we would see the dynamic where they've reconciled and now the husband's got his arm around this woman. It might be very coercive and she wants to dismiss the case. Well, we obviously want to hold people accountable to make sure that it won't happen again. And he's the breadwinner, he's the father. So these are complicated, dynamics. That's not going to be sorted out in a hallway nearly as well as just lowering the temperature and saying, we get it. We totally understand that you want this relationship even to continue. Can we do something to still build in some accountability and get that therapy you've always said y'all needed together? And so there's things that we have tried to do historically to do that. Well, now we've got our own dedicated courtroom thanks to the CJC. We have one place where there's only 40 cases, not 200 on any given week. And you can really do a deep dive. And the very people who are at the CJC working alongside each other and meeting those victims in real time are the ones that walk over every Wednesday to handle those cases.
And if I recall from the tour, there's a special room that that it goes on, and there's a connection or a copper wire straight over to the courthouse.
That's true. So we've really bunkered this place down.
Yeah.
I mean, we have county, city, and state employees in there. We actually have 24. From the sheriff's office, we have 8 employees. We have 6 from WPD. We have another 8 from the DA's office, evenly split between paralegals called victim witness legal assistants and the assistant DAs.
Yep.
And then we have nonprofits that are in there with satellite offices. They still have their main campuses elsewhere. And now we have a staff of 4 CJC employees that work among them to navigate these cases and to spring into action, to even represent them in my case, to go in on those Fridays and get the protective orders. And so what we're trying to do is virtually create something that is a one-stop shop as well.
Right.
And in terms of security, we have cameras that connect us to the bailiffs. So we didn't want to have an environment that looked like it was unwelcoming. We didn't want to have metal detectors. We didn't want to have bailiffs. We deal with some populations. I was with the Latinx population earlier. They were terrified of reporting crime because of deportations and ICE. Do you want them to call 911? Of course you do. Do you want them to come in? Absolutely. Is anything going to happen to them if they come in other than getting the same awesome care as anybody else? That's exactly what's going to happen. So you don't want to look unwelcoming, but you also want to be safe.
Right.
So we have locked doors. We have, lockers that we ask people to leave their bags in because they're not going to be frisked the way they would be at a courthouse. And we obviously have panic buttons and people with law enforcement that are all around us. They can spring into action if necessary. Fortunately, we haven't needed that. But what we're all about is making people feel safe and welcome. And the technology helps us do that. And 6 months into this journey, all the courts in this area went virtual, meaning there's an e-courts initiative that I could let other people tell you about. It's in all 100 counties now. It's called Odyssey. And we are connected to that service. So that means we can file all the paperwork from the comfort of a room that looks like this. If we need to get on, a video chat with a judge to, show injuries or to, have them talk instead of just read our paperwork, we can do that. And then, of course, the camera systems that I told you about that can record that interview, can go right to the detectives' desks. And that way, even though maybe just 2 people are talking, we can have several of those professionals looking at it in real time or record it for future use in a case.
Absolutely. So, the CJC, it's a one-stop shop of, there's a service there, but it's also, it's a space that co-locates a bunch of services and nonprofits that one person can benefit from without having to travel all across town and maybe never even make it to one of them.
That's the idea. We used to, hand out brochures. And then, I heard at this one conference one time, brochures just give you paper cuts. They're really not helping anyone. If you give someone, like a recipe for, hey, here's how you make yourself safe tonight, and they're in crisis, that's doing zero. You have to put good people in their way, not just a good idea. And if you're telling them even, hey, just drive 10 blocks down the street, it's like driving to a foreign country. They're never going to get there. You have to have that nonprofit come down to this same visiting office, and we have 5 visiting offices for anyone to come, so that we can have that warm handoff, so that we can have that, hey, you're safe now, and this might be the next person you need to talk to about where you're going to stay tonight or where the kids are going to go to school for a little while or whatever it is, what the safety plan might entail. And so that's the goal. And, when I mentioned that I was at a conference and heard some of this, to be clear, this is a model that works. It's started in the year 2000.
Okay.
I'm out in San Diego. The DA out there named Casey Gwynn did basically what I did here. I thought I was the first person to do it. I wasn't. We were just running parallel tracks and wouldn't meet each other for years.
How cool.
And he was not only co-locating police and prosecutors for domestic violence. The city attorney in San Diego handles all those cases. He had a staff of 300. It's a little bit bigger in San Diego, 3.5 million.
Right.
They also said, why don't we bring in some of these wonderful nonprofits? And he actually went on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and not surprisingly, it blew up. And in fact, she said to him at the break, "I just changed your life. I hope that's okay." He goes, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Wait till you get back to your office."
Yeah.
And the phone started ringing almost immediately. Everyone wanted to come and see what they were doing.
Yep.
One of them was Laura Bush, who was at the time the First Lady of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Would you come to your hometown of Washington, D.C.?" And so he did. And he thought he was meeting with her. And then George walks into the room and says, "Didn't tell you before you got here, but there's 300 cameras out there, and we're going to hold a press conference and say we're going to take this around the country, and we'd like you to be the Johnny Appleseed to plant these things."
Yeah.
And so Casey actually did that. Casey was just here in Wilmington to do a strategic plan with us, and we involved 175 community leaders, which we can get into in a little bit.
Yep.
But to be clear, and Casey's one of my heroes, we were at a conference together about 3 years ago. I was asked to be a keynote speaker to talk about the trauma-informed courts that we set up here in North Carolina, that I was so privileged to be asked to chair the task force by the Chief Justice. It was called the ACEs Task Force, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences and Adverse Community Environments, that pair of ACEs that really leads to more victimization and this never-ending cycle of abuse.
Yep.
So I was talking about that, and Casey was talking about family justice centers in America, and the conference organizer said, "Why don't you guys go out to dinner with us?" And it was somewhere in the middle of that he said, "Why don't you have one of these in Wilmington?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Do you have any money?" I said, "Oh yeah, we have money in Wilmington." He said, "Why don't you ask for some of it?" And so I came back, and the endowment had just been created.
Yep.
And at the time, I think they're on a rolling cycle now, but at the time, the endowment actually had a once a year application. And I looked, and it was due in 4 days. So I reached out to the sheriff and the chief and all these nonprofits I just mentioned. And I said, "Can you write me a letter of support?" And I love him. Ed McMahon said, "Letter of support? How many am I allowed to send?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you get this, I want my SEAL Team 6 in there, Ben."
Mm-hmm.
And Donnie Williams, the chief of police at WPD at the time, said the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
These nonprofits were like, "We are all in."
Mm-hmm.
And so within the space of just a few days, we said, "Let's do this."
Amazing.
And, you know, we had the framed out idea from the Family Justice Center model.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've kidded people through the years, because $5 million is a lot of money. To be clear, $5 million is a lot of money.
Yes.
I kidded people. I'm like, I should have asked for 10, because now that we're in the work and we know the resources we actually need, it's such a great return on investment, Chris. You always want to do more. But I'd like to tell you what we did with that money, if I could.
Please, yes.
Because a lot of people have asked,
Yes.
Where did it all go? Half of it went to the district attorney's office to grow the office by 20% for the next 3 years, because that was desperately needed.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, we created whole units and whole courtrooms that didn't exist. And we're talking about on the toughest to prove, hardest cases, and not hiring kids straight out of law school, but taking senior prosecutors who said, "I want to take this journey, and I'm ready to leave quote unquote permanent employment and go on to this grant for a while."
Mm-hmm.
And they did. And so did the victim witness legal assistants.
Mm-hmm.
We then took over this old jail tower that needed some rehabbing. And this is where the story gets beautiful, because Charlotte is building one of these centers right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually 8 other family justice centers around North Carolina, usually in the metro cores. So think Greensboro. Guilford County actually has 2 courthouses. It's only one of 2 counties that has 2 courthouses.
Okay.
And they have an FJC in both Greensboro and High Point, right across from their courthouse, or in their courthouse in High Point's case. Asheville, Durham, Wake, all these have FJCs. Charlotte is building one right now. And Spencer Merriweather, the DA there, is one of my best friends. And he and I have gone to a lot of the same conferences. We're on the ACEs task force together. He actually started this conversation with Hope Alliance that Casey runs a year before I did. They are at year 3 of construction right now. They're still under construction, and they've spent $55 million.
Holy.
We started construction in January of 2024, and we moved in by September of 2024.
Amazing.
And we did all of that with not only the remainder of the grant, but we were able to hire 2 employees to now run it. Me and Sue Ann Bechtel, who retired the same month I did from the courthouse after 20 years of running the family court division, and was Judge Corpening's paralegal in private practice before that. So she has been there and done it. The 2 of us came over to actually work in this space that if you walk in now, you can't even believe you're in an old jail.
No, not at all.
And you're like, well, how could you possibly do it for that price? Well, the answer to that is McKinley Builders. If you know Ken Dull, Ken is married to Vicki. Vicki is the original executive director of the Harrelson Center.
That's right.
And she was the one who always wanted to do something with that tower, but it was too hard. And they were, fortunately, through some state funding also, they were able to start getting that going. Meade Van Pelt, who's now the executive director, really got that project greenlit. And so it was already in the process of being turned into something. They had taken the base of that tower and turned it into Plaza on Princess. It's this wonderful space for fundraisers, for trainings. It can hold up to 300 people. So they had built that, but the 2 towers, the 2 floors immediately above it in the same tower were still under construction. So in that same 4-day period, when I'm like, what do I ask for and what do I need? I literally went across the street to the Harrelson Center and I said to Meade, we need space. And she said, this is amazing. We actually are under construction right now. Can I take you up there? And so I went in while it was still being formed and I said, how much of this has been rented? And she said, only a couple of units. I said, we'll take it. We'll take the whole thing. And she said, how? I said, just the Lord will provide, Meade. Well, so when we got it, I said to Ken, I said, I'm in way over my head. I need your help. And he said, we're gonna do this at cost.
Unbelievable.
And I love McKinley. I can't say enough about their professionalism and what they did. I next turned to an all-female crew, Big Sky Design. I said, listen, men are victims of violence too, and there's going to be many we serve through the years. But I really want this whole vibe to be, women-led in terms of, make it a beach house. Make it something that just has these calming tones, artwork that makes you feel relaxed, toys in the playroom. You guys know what you're doing. Whatever you need, let's make this right.
Right.
They did an amazing job. And so I was very pleased. We won the award this last year for converting,
the Cape Fear Crew Award.
The Cape Fear Crew Award. And that is so richly deserved by Bruce Bowman, our architect, who also is the one that built the courthouse extension that I worked in for the previous 20 years. Quite literally built the office I was in for those years. So really happy to work with Bruce. And then McKinley, and then Big Sky. Without all those people coming together and believing in the vision, we would be way behind. But as you know, Chris, people make the place. And our secret sauce, and the reason I wanted it next to the courthouse was poverty doesn't have a car. We needed a place next to the courthouse for victims and survivors. But also, if we're going to have this continuum of care that I've talked about, where people who are traumatized need help immediately and to be able to, maybe get a suit for court or get hair and makeup for that court. And we have Operation Pretty Things and Philippians Ministries in there already. I'm like, why go anywhere else? The point is, there's a lot of communities that start with this core, this police prosecutor team approach, and then they spend a lot of money building that continuum of care. If you think about it, we did just the opposite. For the last 20 years, this whole ecosystem of support has been, getting incubated, in the front of the Harrelson Center. And we just popped in and said, the justice officials are back. And to have that merger of all that energy under one city block is really the secret sauce. And it's why it's going to be around for 100 years.
I love it. So tell me about the Starfish.
Wow. So actually, it was at the 10th anniversary of the Harrelson Center, so about 15 years ago now, that I was asked to speak about what the big idea was.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up with the Starfish for that talk, and I've since used it a lot. And what I was trying to conceptualize was the arms of outreach. If you think about belonging, what does that word really mean? To me, it means that you own something, like something belongs to you, and people who are stakeholders, you'll treat a place better if you own it than when you rent it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And affordable housing is a huge issue for our community.
Mm-hmm.
Belong also means membership. It means to, belong to a group. It could be the Boys and Girls Clubs or a sports team. That's what you hope for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also be the Crips and the Bloods,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
But people have that need. And if they don't have structure at home, they find it in other 14-year-olds, right, Chris?
That's right.
And then belong also means longing to be. It's a little scrambled up. And that really means, can you self-actualize in this place? Or do you think the game is already rigged?
Mm-hmm.
Are the cards stacked against you? Or do you really feel like the odds are in your favor? So for people to really flourish, we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of prosecutors focus on life and liberty, and obviously, I've dealt with life and death issues and put people in prison and on death row. I've obviously taken people's liberty away on terrible cases. But when you talk about the pursuit of happiness,
Mm-hmm.
that's really good schools for kids. It's great jobs for the adults raising them. It's, hey, we don't want government raising families. We want families doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were trying to come up with how can we give people this sense of belonging, this scaffolding of support when they've experienced trauma, this ACEs I just mentioned, really it's 5 groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's 5 groups in any community in America. And these are the 5 arms of the Starfish.
Right.
And in no particular order, it's government has a role in public safety and public health. I hope we would all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, public health and public safety are the same conversation to me. The root causes of crime are the same thing as the social determinants of health. So if you make people healthier, you make everyone safer.
Mm-hmm.
The faith-based community, they have a role in having people have a sense of belonging and purpose as well. And First Baptist showed that, right? The nonprofits. Nonprofits are frontline groups that really can help bridge that gap between what's going on in the home, maybe after-school programs, or helping with addiction recovery or safety, all the other stuff we've just been talking about. In other words, what we were doing in that building for years,
Mm-hmm.
they have a role. And then schools. Schools give people a sense of purpose, and kids need to be in school. 2 out of 3 people in jail and prison are high school dropouts. So keeping kids in school gives them that purpose, that sense of belonging. And if they've lost that, statistically, you're on a different path. And then finally, business. Jobs give people a sense of purpose. Right? And so just as an example, working with a great leader like Chip Mahan,
Mm-hmm.
Chip said, Ben, what's the strategy for getting these people off the corner because the street's an equal opportunity employer? I said, Chip, who's going to hire someone with that scarlet letter F for felony or M for misdemeanor? The first time you get convicted of a nonviolent felony, we're talking about a 40% hit to your future earning potential for the rest of your life. It's creating a permanent underclass in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have buyer's remorse on doing my job, but what I do say is if they've been clean for 7 years and it's a one-time deal and it's nonviolent and they're eligible for expunging that record, it should be the district attorney who's first in line to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we were the first place in the state to hold an expunction clinic where the DAs ran it with law students. And then Chip said, why don't we invite everybody to this bank I'm building to challenge 100 CEOs, it turned out, Chris,
Mm-hmm.
to hire just 1 person each.
Yep.
That you can background, that you can send through what we called Philippians, not Philippians Ministries, but Phoenix Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
I said, we're going to start our own job program. Let's call it Hometown Hires. And it was so successful that we merged with them because not only did people get their records expunged and then Phoenix and Hometown Hires were putting through this 40-hour boot camp, but we got 500 people back to work, Chris. And you know what that does for crime? I mean, when when now someone who had no economic opportunity is suddenly earning $40,000. A $50,000 a year job, that's like a $500,000 paycheck in some of the neighborhoods we could talk about. It is a game changer. It lifts the entire family out of poverty. So those 5 arms of the Starfish, again, I'm just going to say government, faith, nonprofits, schools, and the business community. Those can change how crime occurs, and you fight crime by building community, and that is the structure of community, the structure for belonging. And then surrounding all of that, or I should say in the middle of it, is health. Again, mind, body, and spirit of individuals, healthy relationships among and between each other. So the Starfish Model was my attempt to say, I gave every one of my employees 2 hours off each week to go volunteer in the community from the first day I was district attorney to the last.
Oh, cool.
And so they were basketball coaches, they were reading tutors, they worked at some of these nonprofits I just mentioned or sat on their boards. And then when we would have, a homicide and we got to know the family, they already know Coach Will. And, it's an entirely different way of serving your community, right? Well, we would also see that there's great leaders who, like Chip, that's his arm of the Starfish, but he's also a man of deep faith. What are we doing to democratize justice and say everyone wants fairness, everyone wants to feel safe? And so when I created this nonprofit, the Starfish is not only our symbol, and if you walk in, you see it. We've actually structured the center like a starfish, and I can get into the processes in a minute, but conceptually, what I wanted to do was turn to leaders and say, if we're going to have a 12-member board of directors, kind of like a jury, I'm used to talking to 12 people, let's have 2 from each arm of the Starfish and 2 from the center for a total of 12. Make it really diverse. So let's pick on some people. Like if you're going to talk about a government leader, how about Judge Faison, who ran drug treatment court for 20 years, and he, by the way, he's also a pastor. So does that mean he's also there?
He might take 2.
He could be there too.
Yeah.
But then you've got Mike Ashcraft. He's pretty good at that. Has 8,000 people in his congregation at Port City Community Church. He'll do. Then you talk about a nonprofit head, right? We have several that are wonderful. Then you go into the schools. Aswani Valetti, what do you think? You went to UNCW. You proud of him? I am.
Absolutely.
And then business. All right, Chip, who's your next guy in Live Oak? BJ Loesch, who's the president now. And then let's go to the center of the Starfish. How about Virginia Adams, who started the School of Nursing at UNCW, and then also put in Lori Whalen, who's running the hospital.
Right.
So we could go to each one of those arms and the center and say, how do we activate this part of the community to look holistically at what we're doing? And so that's the Starfish Model from a leadership standpoint.
Right.
And I answer to that jury every day.
How often do you meet with your board? Monthly?
So we meet quarterly as a big board. But I was emailing them earlier today. One of them was at the center with me yesterday. We have subcommittees that spiral into, finances or looking at youth violence or looking at family violence. And so I see them a whole bunch. And they're really active, and I really thank them. They obviously have day jobs, and they have a lot of other commitments. But to a person, they know they're building something special, and it's neat to take this journey with them.
So tell me about the strategic planning that you guys undertook about a month or two ago.
Well, we did 2. So first of all, we wanted to really listen and not just talk. And that's an important thing to do. Listen to survivors, people with lived experience. And I've been doing that a lot as DA. We had a homicide family support group that would meet monthly. And I've known some of those families for 25 years. And you get close. I mean, when you handle a murder case for a family whose kid's never coming home, you become next of kin. And when I got married, some of the members of the homicide family support group were there. When my children were being born, some of the homicide family support group not only showed up to that hospital with Stephanie and me, but one of them actually, her husband helped deliver them. So you get close. But in terms of everybody at the CJC, the first thing we did was we said, let's go out to the mothership. Let's go to San Diego and see where it all began. They have a wonderful place called One Safe Place. Let's see what it looks like. So we all went out there. Then we also took a bus and drove around to the various family justice centers in North Carolina, knowing that, what happens in Charlotte might be different than Wilmington, but nonetheless, there's going to be some best practices that we can copy. And then we said, for a strategic plan, let's get UNCW involved. And again, I call out Aswani Valetti and the great leadership there. I'm privileged to be a professor at UNCW and have been for many years. That's something I've really loved doing. And I knew there was greatness on that campus. The MPA program, the Masters of Public Administration, they have some wonderful professors who helped us set up the Blue Ribbon Commission on the Prevention of Youth Violence, reducing crime by 26% in the youth enrichment zone over 3 years by increasing graduation rates by that same number. Go figure, you can actually have an inverse relationship between crime and education. But then, you work with a guy like Mark Imperial, or, you talk to Ryan Jones, Crute Jones. I could keep bragging about these guys. Craig Kelly used to be a sheriff's detective, and now he's working in that MPA program. So we met with all of these detectives. They sat down with all of us at the CJC. We actually had a retreat with them. This was a year ago now, more than a year ago. And they said, what we'd like to do is do a SWOT analysis. There's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And let's put 4 classes, each owning a letter, crawling through your paperwork, your processes, interviewing your partners, talking to people who've been through this. And let's spend a whole semester doing that, which they did. And then let's take the next semester to have a strategic plan emerge from that, where again, we put 4 classes actually in competition with each other to come up with what we should do about all this. And we will put them in the Shark Tank, and you can order off the menu of their best ideas. And so we did that really through 2 semesters, and then they just presented to us at the end of May, or end of April, which is when they, were finishing that year. At about that same time, we also asked Casey Gwynn and his team to come in, and I'm very thankful to the endowment, not only for the initial investment into the center, but for seeing it through. They said, Ben, we actually will bring in this group. We believe in, obviously, locals, hearing from the people and being able to spend a lot more time. But in terms of having fidelity towards this national model, we will foot the bill for bringing this team in and having a 2-day listening session with everybody, but then inviting a lot of other people in the community who are not yet here for 2 full business days of throwing ideas up on the wall, listening to them, see what the 5-year plan could be, to hear their voice also. And so we did that. We did that in the month of May, right after we had finished our strategic planning through UNCW. They had come in March to do their listening sessions, and then they came back for those 2 business days. And Chris, it was wonderful. I mean, obviously you had the big players from the justice system all there, but in addition to the nearly 30 employees in the CJC and all the partner agencies that not only have representatives there, but they might bring 5 or 6 people from some of those groups, we had so many other nonprofits in this community who all want the same thing. They want to help families and children have that sense of belonging I just mentioned. And, it's all 5 arms of the Starfish. All 5 arms were represented in that room. And we just recently got back some of their recommendations. And what I'm absolutely committed to doing is over this next 6 months, in other words, July 1st, which we are at today, and through the end of December 31, to try and implement as many of those big ideas as possible. And we can get into some of them if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, some of the top find. I didn't know if you're able to share those
yet. Oh, yeah,
or...
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is to replace me. And, when I first took this job on, I was very clear with my board, with the endowment, with the sheriff, the chief. I said, you know, I am totally committed to this work. I see the need. I think that there's things that are gaps in what we've provided that if we had the right resources, we can do more to uphold that victim's Bill of Rights I just mentioned. But this can't be a one-man show. This cannot be, you know, just a hero's quest. This has to be collaboration. You know, this community doesn't need a savior so much as they need to come together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will agree to do this for the life of the grant, which is December 31st of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I'm giving myself a term limit. It will be time for other people to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the strategic plan was, all right, let's take Ben's job and cut it in half and hire because I'm the CEO and general counsel of the Community Justice Center.
Right.
Let's have an operations director who does all the details that, frankly, Ben, you're terrible at. you always had 50 other employees to do all that. Now that it's just you and Sue Ann, you need more employees. But also, you know, let's get an executive director. So an executive director who's going to run this nonprofit, and an operations director who's going to do all the details and to, you know, implement a lot of the protocols and procedures that we need to have come out of this strategic planning process at the local and national level. And so that's what we're doing. You know, we have actually just closed that process. We've put those out online. If you were at that strategic planning session, you know that we asked all 175 people there to help spread the word, to get these job descriptions out online and to their best friends and any qualified applicants. And that process literally just closed last night. I can tell you there's wonderful applicants for both of those positions.
Okay.
And I'm not the one picking who replaces me or who becomes our operations director. It's actually going to be people like the chief, the sheriff, the DA, some of these nonprofits I mentioned, and some of these board members.
Cool.
They're going to be the ones who form these hiring committees for both jobs, make recommendations to the big board, and again, to make it truly collaborative. So that's one of the big things that we're obviously trying to accomplish in this next 6 months. And I hope that process is finished certainly by September 1st, so that I'll have 4 months or so to really be able to, you know, help mentor and show them what we've unearthed in this last 2 years.
That's amazing. And so the idea of, hey, you've been a huge part of this community. You have all this, this experience and like you mentioned, this quest to try to do something, but by taking yourself out of it, it's becoming more ingrained in the community and not Ben David thing.
That's right. And I think there's real strength in that. I mean, I'm not going to abdicate my responsibility to make this place great. And of course, I intend to stay connected to the CJC until my last breath. I truly believe in the mission and I want it to succeed. I also believe that other people can grab the microphone and lead. And I think that's really important. I mean, you know, it's like they said back in the day to me, give a young man a chance, you know, and I was 34 years old when I got that chance to run for office and run the largest law firm in Wilmington. And I'm profoundly grateful for that. And we're going to give some young folks a chance. Maybe not young, you know, you know, Sue Ann kids me. I mean, I begged her. Now, people thought I was retiring. I used the wrong terms. I had hit judicial retirement, which means I had hit 25 years in the state system.
Okay.
I never wanted to retire. I'm hitting my prime years for being an attorney. I just wasn't going to be the DA anymore. Sue Ann actually retired. She's 20 years older than me, and she was retiring. And I went to her and I said, we need you too bad right now. And she works as hard as anyone I know. And her depth of experience and just the wisdom she brings to helping create these processes and interface with the 9 district court judges who she's helped raise, and they would tell you that. The training she's put together, the calm that she has with, the paperwork that we're putting in place that simultaneously respects people's confidentiality, but also allows information to be shared across, professions when we need to do that. That's not an easy thing to pull off, and it's no time for beginners. So we've had some, wonderful people join the team. Lauren Beatty, who again is from your hometown, she spent the last 25 years as a federal employee in the Department of Justice as a statistician, looking at big grants that, when people are asking the federal government for, block grants going to states, she was the one to look to see if the statistics were backing up what they were saying. And, a lot of people ask, are you going to measure it? Of course we're going to measure. You think the justice officials I mentioned don't want to see return on their investment? And so we needed the first year to basically build it. And starting since last October, we've been measuring it. We haven't made all those numbers public, and there's a good reason for that. We're still fixing the plane. We're still trying to see what works. We know that there's some real successes here. We're trying to respect people's confidentiality, but we intend at some point to show the needle moving with what we're doing, because funders, whether they're an endowment or the state of North Carolina, the county of New Hanover, the city of Wilmington, and we're asking all of them for resources moving forward, they're going to want to see results.
Absolutely.
And I've run on that for my entire career. You should be accountable to the people you serve. And, just as taxpayers had an expectation when I was their district attorney that we would wake up and do the job every day, this hospital money, people died for that hospital money. I mean, there's a lot of folks that are listening right now whose loved ones or they themselves have spent money through the years to build up our community hospital. And this endowment to now invest in 4 pillars, which is health, safety, education, and economic opportunity. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
That's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yep.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. And what my essential premise is we're going to have a much greater return of investment if we focus on that ounce of prevention. Absolutely. Rather than the pound of cure of more prison cells and jail cells. That absolutely has a place, but for the victims and survivors of violence, we need a place for them too.
Yeah. And to break the cycle, right? Like how does it end if you can't break it?
You actually hit on the biggest unlock I had as a prosecutor. And here it is. Today's victim is tomorrow's defendant.
Yep.
The cycle is, here's the cycle of abuse. A child who is harmed, if you don't give them immediate resources, that counseling from that trauma, a pathway forward, getting them out of that dangerous situation, hurt people end up hurting people. They end up self-harming. They medicate their pain by turning to drugs. That's the opioid epidemic.
Yep.
They choose bad relationships, which is that gang we talked about, or that terrible boyfriend that we all know too well, because that's what love looks like.
Yep.
Or if they are that young man that's been abused, they become that bully. They become that perpetrator. So today's victim is tomorrow's defendant. And then with the youth violence, now we're talking child abuse growing up, but youth violence, where I'm talking about someone getting shot for being on the wrong corner or dealing in the community when someone else's territory was there, guess what? They're not going to report that to police. Police will show up at the hospital and say, who shot you? And they don't know.
Yeah.
Of course they know. They're not wanting to be the snitch.
Right.
They want to do it themselves. They're going to get that gun, and they're going to be the shooter 2 weeks from now.
Yep.
The cycle of violence, the cycle of poverty, the cycle of addiction. How do you break cycles? With healing and hope. You've got to get people out of that situation. You've got to get resources and build resilience for kids in particular who are experiencing adverse community environments. We're the only place in all southeastern North Carolina with public housing projects. That's clustered poverty. We are the richest community practically in America now because of this endowment, and we still have 7 food deserts. No one listening thinks that's okay.
Yep.
I certainly don't. And where do we need to invest our money in those places? Those are the adverse community environments. And then for the abuse that happens under anyone's roof, and we just talked about it, Chris, it can happen at landfall or UNCW just as easily as it can happen in, high poverty areas. Those are adverse childhood experiences. And if we can get to the families and individuals who are most in need of those critical services. Give them their own SWAT team of services, give them their own courtroom, get them that continuum of care under one roof or at least one campus. Think about what we could do to change the arc of the future. You know, people have asked me, what are you most proud of in the 20 years you were DA? You know what it is? This is a full circle moment. I mean, I'm sitting in my office today thinking this used to be a jail. I mean, how ironic is that? Well, the year that we closed that jail was 2004, the same month I became DA. It was because it only held 350 beds in there and we had 500 people in it. So that's called overcrowding, Chris. And you've heard of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. We were getting sued by a prisoners group back then. And so the county said, we got to build a bigger jail. So they went 8 miles out of town to Blue Clay Road and built a wonderful facility. And we filled it overnight. And they said, wait, there's more. Wilmington's projected to grow over the next 20 years. And you're going to need a bed space for 1,000 people by the year 2025. So we're going to build it in pod-like format where we can add on pods. And incarceration's expensive, Chris. I mean, we're talking over $100 a day per inmate. Start doing that math. And mass incarceration doesn't work. We can get into that whole talk too. But we are 5% of the world's population in America and 25% of the Earth's prisoners. Okay. Everyone agrees, and I am unapologetic about putting people in prison for career crime and violent crime. But how about mentally ill? How about drug addicted? How about our kids? Right? There's got to be a different strategy for a lot of this. It does involve rehabilitation and treatment in many cases, right? Well, so this jail was supposed to be growing as Wilmington grew. Well, because we had the Harrelson Center across the street and because we were fighting crime by building community with utilizing all 5 arms of that Starfish and really being the place, not just in the state, but in America, that was really focusing on what I call community-based prosecution. I don't take credit for this. It's everybody working together. Through the next 20 years, we kept the jail numbers at the exact same level. So where we are today in the year 2026 is still that same facility without an extra bed in it. You're like, well, how do we pull that off, Ben? Because I moved here in the last 20 years, and come to think of it, so does everyone I know.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what the answer is? The answer is we reduced violent crime by 46% over that same time period. And I'm not talking about a one-off number. Go to the internet, play with Claude or ChatGPT, and just say, is Ben right? Have we really? And what you'll see is this, while the population has been doing that. And the reason is because of everything I've been talking about today. How are we going to do it for the next 20 years? The Community Justice Center. We now have a home for it. We now have a place where we can be very focused, and whoever gets that 911 call, whoever happens to be sitting in the chair that is occupied by the chief or the sheriff or the DA, whoever the chief district court judge is, they're going to have to turn somewhere and say, where can we get hope, healing, and justice all in the same spot? We are on the monopoly board of the justice system, Park Place and Boardwalk, all in one. And we have now built a place for pennies on the dollar, where if the commissioners, if the city council, if state legislators are listening right now, for rent that only costs us about $300,000 a year, we're unlocking almost $3.5 million in salary that the taxpayers are already paying for. And it turns out they work better when they're all under one roof.
Yeah, imagine that.
You tell me if that's not a good 10-to-1 return on your investment.
Heck yeah.
Can I just say, today's the new year, it's July 1st, and in the county, the city, and the state, this is the first day where you find out how the budgets are being spent.
Yes.
Very pleased to report. The county has come in for not only $300,000 of that rent that I just mentioned, because they get it. But they also are paying now for the prosecutors that are falling off the grant in January. And the VWA is also. Thank you, county commissioners. When you talk about the state, they're like, this is working. They just gave us $200,000 today. Fantastic. So now we've got government investing into the little nonprofit that could, all because of the visionary leadership of some of the people on the endowment and their professional staff who said, why don't we invest in that ounce of prevention? Why don't we stop building more prisons and start building community? Why don't we actually trust that public safety should be done by people who are accountable through elections and jury verdicts and have to answer every day to it, and co-locate them with public servants and nonprofits who really want to do that work and walk alongside those victims and can get into that squishy space that government wasn't supposed to do. That's what we're trying to do at the CJC.
Well, it's an absolutely amazing story. And just, I mean, to think about, if I've got 4 days to put this, to put this thing together,
Yeah.
and calling and rallying the troops, getting the right people around the table. And, almost 3 years later, it's been...
Well, and like with anything I did as district attorney, there's no way I could have pulled it off without this incredible team that was all around me. Any greatness that the office experienced was through the agency of others. And that's what I'm trying to say now. I know that the CJC is effective and it's saving lives. And what it's doing is because of people in the trenches that do these trials and cases every day, that are in these, not only conference rooms, but out on the street, finding the victims. We've had hundreds of law enforcement officers come through. They now have stickers on usually the back of their cell phone or their favorite notepad that has a QR code.
Yep.
And when they're at a scene now, they're like, listen, even if you're not ready to leave, there's no statute of limitations on any felony we're talking about, and there's 2 years on any misdemeanor. Just scan your phone right here, and when you're ready for help, they're waiting for you. And it goes right to our office. And if they actually open it up, what they'll see is there's a contact number for the shelter. Be safe tonight. There's a contact for rape crisis. You can talk to an operator immediately. There's a contact for maybe your kids need something at the carousel center. There's a contact for the sheriff, the chief, and the district attorney's office, all virtually in one shop. But now if you were to actually take the added step of either coming to the courthouse yourself and being sent over or walking into our place, you'd see all those people within feet of each other.
So last question, and you don't have to answer this, but so after your, December 31st, what's next for Ben David?
It's so exciting that I'm going to hold it. People want to know that answer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I would love to come back here towards the end of the year on maybe your 80th podcast episode. Sit with the best looking district attorney in the state, which is my identical twin brother, John, who is retiring December 31st.
Okay.
And I'd like to answer that question together.
That sounds like a plan.
How about that?
That sounds really fun.
I'll give you a teaser. We're not retiring, and we're keeping our law license. After that, you're going to have to wait. I can
only imagine.
We'll give you the exclusive though, Chris.
How cool.
Have us back together, and instead of Potter, we'll have my brother.
Sounds so great. Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah. Chris, thank you for having me here today.
Awesome.